A cry for justice. The grand courtroom was bustling with activity, its tall windows casting beams of morning sunlight that danced across the polished wooden floors. Judge Elias Turner, a towering figure of integrity in the legal world, sat at the bench. His crisp black robe and stern expression made it clear why he was both respected and feared. At 55, his sharp blue eyes betrayed a deep weariness, the result of years spent balancing justice with the intricacies of human emotion. As the prosecutor presented their opening arguments in a high-profile corruption case, the courtroom doors suddenly burst open. A collective gasp rippled through the room as a young girl, no older than 8, stumbled in, clutching a tattered pink teddy bear. Tears streaked her dark cheeks, and her messy braids swung as she scanned the room, her small voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Judge Turner," she cried, her voice trembling with fear and urgency. "Please, you have to help me." The room froze. The defense attorney, mid-objection, faltered. The judge's gavel, poised to restore order, hovered in the air. Something about the girl's desperate tone rooted Elias to the spot. "Bailiff," he finally said, his deep voice softer than usual. "Bring her here." The bailiff hesitated but complied, guiding the trembling girl to the stand. Her oversized shoes squeaked against the floor as she clutched the teddy bear tighter. "What's your name, child?" Elias asked gently, leaning forward. His voice, usually a weapon of authority, now held a note of concern. The girl sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Amara Jones. My mommy told me to find you if something bad happened." Elias stiffened. The name tickled something deep in his memory, a faint whisper from the past. "Your mother?" he asked cautiously. "What's her name?" Amara's big brown eyes locked onto his. "Her name is Grace Jones," she said, her voice cracking. "She said you'd know her." Elias's breath caught. Grace Jones. The name hit him like a freight train, pulling him back decades to a different time, a different life. Memories of a young, brilliant woman who had been both his brightest law student and his greatest regret flooded his mind. His hand gripped the gavel tighter. "Where is your mother now?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "They took her," Amara whispered, her tears returning. "The men in suits. She told me to run and give you this." She unzipped the teddy bear's hidden compartment, pulling out a small, crumpled envelope. Elias took it, his heart pounding. Inside was a note written in Grace's unmistakable handwriting. "Elias, if you're reading this, I need your help. They'll kill me if the truth comes out. Protect Amara. Trust no one." The room erupted in whispers, but Elias barely noticed. He stood abruptly. "This court is in recess," he declared, slamming his gavel down. "Bailiff, clear the room." As the gallery emptied, Elias knelt to Amara's level. "You're safe now," he promised, though he wasn't sure it was true. "We'll find your mother." But deep down, he knew the path ahead would be treacherous. Grace had been in trouble before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher, the danger more immediate. And now, a child's life hung in the balance. Elias Turner sat back in his chair, his heart racing as he studied the crumpled note. Grace Jones. The name carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. She had been a firebrand in his courtroom as a young clerk, challenging norms and questioning his rulings in a way that no one else dared. She had left a lasting impression on him. And now, years later, her child stood before him, trembling and clutching a tattered bear. He glanced down at Amara, who had curled into the chair next to his bench. The oversized robe of the bailiff draped over her tiny frame like a protective shield. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, but she clung to the teddy bear as though it were her lifeline. "Amara," Elias said, his voice soft but firm. "Do you know what your mommy was working on? Did she tell you why she thought someone might hurt her?" Amara hesitated, her small fingers fidgeting with the bear's worn bow. "Mommy said she found something bad at her job, something that hurt people. She said she was going to stop them. Elias frowned. Grace was a journalist, one of the best investigative reporters he'd ever known. If she believed she was onto something dangerous, it likely was. Did she tell you anything else? Maybe where she was going, or who might help her? Amara shook her head, her braids swaying. She said if the bad men came, I had to find you. She said you'd do the right thing, like in the stories she used to tell me. The weight of Grace's words settled heavily on Elias's chest. The right thing. The phrase echoed in his mind. He had spent his career upholding the law, navigating the gray areas of justice. But this wasn't just about the law. It was about survival. Bailiff. Elias called out, "Bring Detective Harper here immediately." The bailiff nodded, his face serious, and hurried out of the courtroom. Elias returned his focus to Amara, who was now pressing her cheek against the teddy bear, her breaths uneven. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and yet there was a quiet resilience in her eyes. "What's your bear's name?" Elias asked gently, hoping to distract her, even for a moment. "His name's Button," Amara whispered. "Mommy said he was my protector." "Button," Elias repeated with a small smile. "He seems to be doing a good job so far." Amara offered a faint smile, but it quickly faded. "Will you find Mommy?" she asked, her voice cracking. "She's all I have." Elias knelt beside her chair, meeting her gaze. "I promise you, Amara, I'll do everything I can to bring your mother back." The doors to the courtroom creaked open, and Detective Harper entered, his trench coat trailing behind him. A seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and a reputation for digging into cases no one else would touch, Harper stopped short when he saw Amara. "What's this about, Judge?" Harper asked, his tone wary. Elias straightened, his demeanor shifting to that of command. "Detective, this child's mother has been taken under suspicious circumstances. I need you to listen carefully and act quickly. Her mother, Grace Jones, has evidence that implicates dangerous individuals." "Grace Jones?" Harper's eyes widened. "The journalist. She's been on the radar lately, something about exposing corporate fraud. Are you saying she's missing?" "Not just missing," Elias said grimly, handing over the note. "She's in danger. We need to find her, and we need to do it quietly. Whoever is behind this won't hesitate to hurt her or this child to keep their secrets." Harper read the note and let out a low whistle. "You're not exaggerating. This is bad. What do we do?" Amara asked softly, looking between the two men. Elias placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "First, we'll get you somewhere safe. Harper, I need you to arrange protection for her." Harper nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "What about the mother? If she's alive, she's on borrowed time. And if this note is right, she has evidence that could bring down some powerful people." Elias's jaw tightened. "We focus on finding her and the evidence. Check Grace's known associates, her recent stories, anything that might give us a lead. And Harper, be discreet." "Understood," Harper said, pulling out his phone. "I'll get my team on this." Amara clung to Elias's arm as Harper began making calls. "Will you stay with me?" she whispered. Elias looked down at her, and for the first time in years, he felt the walls he had built around himself beginning to crack. This wasn't just another case, another problem to solve. This was personal. "I'm not going anywhere, Amara," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "You have my word." But as he held the child close, a dark unease settled over him. He knew the type of people Grace was up against. Promises wouldn't be enough. To save Grace and protect Amara, he would have to fight harder than he ever had before, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for the battle ahead. The secrets within. The night outside Judge Elias Turner's home was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold breeze. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Amara sat curled up on his couch, her small figure swallowed by a thick quilt. Button the teddy bear rested on her lap, its button eyes seemingly staring into the distance. Elias stood in his dimly lit study, staring out the window into the darkness. His mind raced with possibilities, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a physical burden. Grace's note replayed in his mind, each word laced with desperation. She had trusted him to protect her daughter and uncover the truth, but the path forward was anything but clear. Detective Harper's arrival snapped him out of his thoughts. The seasoned detective carried a folder under one arm and wore an expression that blended urgency with fatigue. "You have something?" Elias asked, stepping aside to let him in. Harper nodded grimly, placing the folder on the desk. "We started digging into Grace's recent activities. She's been investigating a major pharmaceutical company, Chemicor. They'd got a squeaky clean public image, new cancer treatments, experimental therapies, the works. But Grace believed they were falsifying trial data. She had proof that people were dying during their trials, and they covered it up." Elias opened the folder, scanning the documents Harper had collected. There were patient reports with large sections redacted, emails between executives that hinted at payouts, and photographs of what looked like a warehouse. But it wasn't enough to blow the case wide open. "Where's the hard evidence?" Elias asked, flipping through the pages. Harper hesitated. "That's the thing. Grace never submitted her final report. She must have been holding on to the evidence when she disappeared." Elias sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We need to find her, Harper. And we need to do it before they realize we're onto them." Meanwhile, Amara's world. While the adults discussed plans in hushed tones, Amara couldn't help but feel restless. She held Button close, her fingers tracing the hidden zipper at its back. It was her secret, one her mother had entrusted her with. But now she wasn't sure if it was enough. "Amara." Elias's voice broke through her thoughts. He knelt beside her, his expression soft. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. "Do you think my mommy's scared?" Elias hesitated, then answered honestly. "Maybe, but she's also strong. And she's smart. If anyone can find a way to stay safe, it's her." Amara looked down at Button, her small voice barely above a whisper. "She said the bear keeps secrets safe." Elias frowned, catching the weight in her words. "Secrets?" he asked gently. "What kind of secrets?" Amara hesitated, then slowly unzipped the bear's hidden compartment. She reached inside and pulled out a small USB drive, its casing scratched but intact. "This," she said, holding it out to him. "Mommy told me it was important." Elias's eyes widened as he took the drive. "Did she tell you what's on it?" Amara shook her head. "She just said it would help you stop the bad people." Elias exchanged a look with Harper, who immediately pulled out a laptop from his bag and plugged in the drive. The screen illuminated the room as a series of files appeared. Audio recordings, emails, and spreadsheets. Harper clicked on the first audio file, and Grace's voice filled the room. "Grace's evidence. This is Grace Jones, recording on March 15th. I've uncovered documents showing Chemicor falsified trial results for their flagship cancer drug, Zinthera. Patients in the initial trials suffered catastrophic organ failure, but the company reported them as non-compliant instead of acknowledging the drug's effects. At least 12 people died as a result." Elias clenched his fists as Grace's calm yet resolute voice continued. "I have emails from Chemicor executives discussing how to suppress the information. They talk about silencing whistleblowers and paying off families. I've also discovered a warehouse where they're storing unapproved batches of the drug, likely to avoid regulatory oversight. I'll be meeting with my contact tomorrow to get more information." The recording ended abruptly, leaving the room in tense silence. "Do we know where this warehouse is?" Elias asked. Harper opened one of the spreadsheets, scanning the addresses listed. "This one," he said, pointing to a location on the screen. "It's a Chemicor property listed as a storage facility on their financial records." Elias's mind worked quickly. "We need to get there. If Grace mentioned it, she likely believed there was something crucial inside." "It's risky," Harper said. If Chemicor's goons are watching, they'll know we're onto them. Elias glanced at Amara, who was watching them with wide eyes. We don't have a choice. The warehouse. That night, Elias and Harper parked a discreet distance from the warehouse. The building loomed in the darkness, its rusted exterior giving it the appearance of abandonment. But the faint glow of lights from within told a different story. Stay sharp, Harper murmured, drawing his weapon as they approached. If anyone catches us, we're trespassing at best. Elias nodded, his heart pounding. This was far from the safety of the courtroom, where his gavel wielded authority. Out here, they were on their own. They slipped inside through a side entrance, the air thick with the scent of chemicals. Stacks of unmarked boxes lined the walls, their labels hastily scratched out. Harper pulled out his phone, snapping photos while Elias sifted through the contents of an open box. These are samples, Elias whispered, holding up a vial. It's the drug Grace mentioned. Before Harper could respond, the sound of voices echoed through the warehouse. They froze, their breaths shallow. Two men in dark suits entered the room, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. They're doing a sweep, Harper whispered. We need to move. They crept toward the back of the warehouse, ducking behind stacks of crates. As they rounded a corner, Elias spotted something that made his blood run cold. A laptop sitting on a desk, its screen displaying surveillance footage of Grace. Harper, Elias hissed, pointing to the screen. They have her. The detective swore under his breath. We need that footage. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved toward the desk, his heart hammering in his chest. But just as he reached for the laptop, a flashlight beam landed on him. Hey, one of the men shouted. Run, Harper yelled, shoving Elias toward the exit. They sprinted through the maze of crates, the shouts of the guards growing louder behind them. As they burst through the side door and into the night, Harper pulled out his phone, dialing his team. Backup, he barked. We need backup at the Riverside warehouse, and send a car to Judge Turner's house. Now. The safe house. Back at Elias's home, Amara sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker outside. She felt a knot of fear tightening in her chest, the kind that no amount of hugs or kind words could loosen. Button sat on her lap, his comforting presence the only thing keeping her grounded. When the door finally opened and Elias stepped inside, bruised and breathless, Amara ran to him. Did you find her? She asked, her voice trembling. Elias knelt, placing his hands on her shoulders. Not yet, he said honestly, but we found something that will help us. We're closer now. Amara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. You promised, Judge Elias, and I'll keep that promise, he said, his voice firm, no matter what it takes. As the night deepened, Elias realized something profound. This wasn't just about justice or uncovering the truth. This was about redemption, for Grace, for Amara, and for himself, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. Shadows of the past. The rain pounded against the windshield as Judge Elias Turner navigated the winding back roads, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Beside him, Detective Harper sat with his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders to his team. The night was alive with tension, each passing mile pulling them deeper into the web of danger surrounding Grace Jones and the powerful forces she had dared to expose. In the back seat, Amara clutched Button, her wide eyes fixed on the darkness outside. She hadn't spoken much since they left the house, her small frame trembling with the weight of uncertainty. Elias glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart aching at the sight of her fear. She was just a child, caught in a battle she couldn't fully understand. The destination was a small cabin hidden deep within the woods, a safe house arranged by Harper's trusted contacts. It wasn't much, but it was far enough off the grid to keep them out of immediate danger while they pieced together their next move. Are you sure this place is secure? Elias asked, his voice low. As secure as it gets, Harper replied, ending his call. The team will keep an eye on the main roads. If anyone so much as sneezes near this place, we'll know. Elias nodded, his focus returning to the road. He wanted to believe Harper's assurances, but his gut told him that the people they were up against wouldn't stop easily. Chemicor had money, influence, and a long history of burying inconvenient truths. If they had Grace, it was only a matter of time before they came for Amara. The safe house. The cabin was small but sturdy, its wooden exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Inside, the air was warm and slightly musty, the scent of aged pine mingling with the faint aroma of a wood-burning stove. Harper immediately set about checking the perimeter while Elias helped Amara settle into one of the small bedrooms. "This will be your room for now," Elias said gently, kneeling to her level. "I know it's not home, but it's safe." Amara nodded, clutching Button tightly. "Will Mommy know where to find us?" Elias hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to find her first, Amara. I promise." She studied his face for a moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words, before finally nodding. "Okay." Once she was settled, Elias returned to the living room, where Harper was spreading out a map on the coffee table. A small lamp cast a dim glow over the room, illuminating the detective's determined expression. "This is the warehouse we just left," Harper said, marking the location with a red pen. "They're clearly using it to store illegal batches of Xanthera. But the laptop we found, it's part of a larger system. If we can trace the IP address, we might be able to locate where they're keeping Grace." Elias frowned. "Do we have anyone who can do that without alerting Chemicor?" Harper smirked. "I've got a guy. He's not exactly above board, but he's the best at what he does." Elias raised an eyebrow. "We're trusting a hacker now." At this point, Harper said with a shrug, "I'd trust a dog with a typewriter if it got us results." The hacker. 2 hours later, Harper's contact, a wiry man in his early 30s who went by the alias Bite, arrived at the cabin. Dressed in a hoodie and jeans, Bite carried a worn backpack filled with equipment. His sharp eyes darted around the room as he set up his laptop on the coffee table. "So let me get this straight," Bite said, typing furiously as he spoke. "You want me to hack into a multi-billion-dollar corporation's network without leaving a trace? Easy peasy. Just find out where they're holding Grace," Harper replied, his tone clipped. "And if you can pull any files on Xanthera or their executive meetings, even better." Bite nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Give me an hour." As Bite worked, Elias sat in the corner, his thoughts consumed by the implications of their actions. If they were caught, not only would it ruin his career, but it could also jeopardize their chances of saving Grace. Still, the thought of Amara growing up without her mother was enough to push those fears aside. "Judge Turner." Amara's voice broke through his thoughts. Elias turned to see her standing hesitantly in the doorway, her teddy bear dangling from one hand. "What is it, Amara?" "Can I stay here with you?" she asked softly. Elias's chest tightened. "Of course. Come here." She climbed onto the couch beside him, curling up against his side. For a moment, the weight of the situation seemed to lift as he wrapped an arm around her. She was a reminder of why they were fighting, a symbol of innocence worth protecting. A breakthrough. An hour later, Bite leaned back in his chair, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Got it." Harper and Elias rushed to his side, peering at the screen. A map was displayed, marked with a blinking red dot. "That's their main facility," Bite explained. "High security, off the books. If they're holding Grace anywhere, it's there." Elias studied the location. "How do we get in?" Bite's grin widened. "Already working on that. I've got blueprints, security rotations, even the coffee preferences of the guards." Harper snorted. "Good. We'll need all the help we can get." But as they began planning their next move, a loud bang shattered the quiet. The room plunged into chaos as the sound of breaking glass and heavy footsteps filled the air. "They found us," Harper shouted, drawing his weapon. Elias grabbed Amara, pulling her close as the door burst open. Men in black tactical gear stormed the cabin, their faces obscured by masks. "Move," one of them barked, pointing a gun at Harper. But Harper didn't move. He fired first, taking out one of the intruders before diving for cover behind the couch. "Elias, take her and run," Harper shouted. Elias hesitated, his instincts screaming to stay and fight. But Amara's terrified cries snapped him into action. He scooped her up and bolted for the back door, weaving through the dark forest as gunfire erupted behind them. A narrow escape. The forest was a blur as Elias ran, his breath ragged and his arms wrapped protectively around Amara. Her small hands clutched his shirt, her sobs muffled against his chest. "We're going to be okay," Elias panted, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Behind them, the shouts of the attackers grew fainter, but he didn't stop until they reached a clearing. He crouched behind a fallen tree, trying to catch his breath. Amara looked up at him, her tear-streaked face pale. "Are they going to catch us?" Elias shook his head, his voice firm. "No, I won't let them." As they sat in the darkness, the weight of their situation became clear. They were no longer just chasing the truth. They were running for their lives. But even in the face of danger, Elias knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop until Grace was safe, and he wouldn't let anything happen to Amara. Not while he still had the strength to fight. Into the lion's den. Elias Turner crouched low behind the fallen tree, his breathing uneven as he strained to listen for sounds of pursuit. The forest was unnervingly quiet, save for the occasional crackle of twigs underfoot. Beside him, Amara clung to his arm, her small face pressed against Button the teddy bear. Every instinct screamed for him to keep moving, but his legs burned, and Amara's trembling form told him she needed a moment to gather herself. "We're okay," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "Just keep holding on to Button, Amara. He's keeping you brave." Amara nodded, her tear-streaked face lifting to meet his. "Are we safe now?" "Not yet," Elias admitted, "but we're going to get there. I promise." His mind raced through their options. The attackers at the cabin were undoubtedly from Chemicor, their precision and speed indicating professional-grade mercenaries. Harper's last command echoed in his ears: "Take her and run." It wasn't just an order, it was a sacrifice. Elias clenched his jaw, forcing away the guilt gnawing at his insides. He had to believe Harper was still alive, fighting to buy them time. "Can you walk?" Elias asked Amara gently. She nodded, gripping his hand tightly as they rose to their feet. Together, they moved cautiously through the dense forest, the canopy above swallowing most of the moonlight. Elias kept one hand on Amara's shoulder and the other hovering near his phone, ready to call for help if the signal returned. A faint signal. After nearly an hour of navigating the woods, they stumbled upon an old hiking trail. Elias paused, pulling out his phone and holding it up toward the sky. A single bar of service flickered into view. Finally, he muttered, dialing Harper's emergency contact. The phone rang once, twice, and then Turner. Harper's voice was rough, but alive. "Harper, are you okay? What happened at the cabin?" "They hit us hard," Harper replied, his voice strained but steady. "We managed to take out a few of them, but they were better equipped. Bike got away. I think he's circling back to regroup." "Where are you?" "On a trail somewhere west of the cabin," Elias said, glancing around. "We're heading toward the road. Can you send someone?" "Not yet. Chemicor will have people watching every exit. You need to stay off-grid until we can regroup." Harper paused, and Elias could hear him coughing. "There's a safe house 2 miles north of your location. It's a hunting lodge, empty this time of year. I'll text you the coordinates." "Got it," Elias said, his resolve hardening. "Harper, thank you for everything. Just keep that kid safe," Harper replied before the line went dead. A moment later, Elias's phone buzzed with a message. The coordinates for the safe house appeared on the screen. He crouched down to show Amara. "We're going here, okay? It's not far." Amara nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "Will Mommy be there?" "Not yet," Elias said, his voice soft but firm. "But this is part of how we'll find her." The lodge. The hunting lodge was hidden deep in the forest, its rustic exterior almost indistinguishable from the trees surrounding it. Elias pushed open the heavy wooden door, revealing a single large room with a stone fireplace, a few worn chairs, and a small kitchenette. "Looks abandoned," he murmured, scanning the space for any signs of danger. Satisfied that they were alone, he turned to Amara. "Let's get you warm." Amara sank into one of the chairs near the fireplace, while Elias worked to light a fire. Soon, the room filled with the soft crackle of flames, the warmth a welcome reprieve from the night's chill. As the firelight danced across the walls, Amara looked at Elias with wide eyes. "Do you think the bad men know about this place?" Elias hesitated before answering. "I don't think so. But we'll be careful, just in case." Amara hugged Button tightly, her small voice barely above a whisper. "I wish Mommy were here." Elias knelt beside her, his expression softening. "We're going to find her. And when we do, she'll be so proud of how brave you've been." Amara nodded, but her eyes remained heavy with worry. Piecing the puzzle. Once Amara was asleep, Elias turned his attention to the evidence Bite had extracted from Chemicor's network. He opened his laptop, the dim glow of the screen illuminating the room as he sifted through the files. Each document painted a more damning picture of Chemicor's corruption. Falsified drug trial results, emails discussing bribes to regulators, and internal memos strategizing how to silence whistleblowers. But one file stood out, a shipment manifest detailing deliveries to a remote facility outside the city. The address matched the location Bite had identified as Chemicor's main holding site. "This is it," Elias muttered to himself. "This is where they're keeping Grace." A sudden noise outside the lodge snapped him out of his focus. He froze, his ears straining to catch the sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and drawing closer. Elias quickly shut the laptop and moved to Amara's side, gently shaking her awake. "Amara, we need to hide," he whispered. Her eyes flew open, fear flashing across her face. She clutched Button as Elias guided her toward a small storage closet in the corner of the room. "Stay here and don't make a sound," he said, his voice firm but calm. "No matter what happens, I'll come back for you." Amara nodded, her small hands trembling as she disappeared into the closet. Elias closed the door and turned to face the main room, his heart pounding. The confrontation. The door to the lodge creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. A man in a dark suit, his silhouette sharp against the faint moonlight. He carried a weapon, its gleaming barrel pointed toward the floor, but his posture was one of authority and menace. "Judge Turner," the man said, his voice cold and smooth. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble." Elias straightened, his hands clenched at his sides. "If you're here to scare me, you're wasting your time." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "You misunderstand. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to offer you a choice." "And what choice is that?" "Hand over the evidence," the man said, gesturing toward the laptop on the table. "Walk away from this mess. We'll even let the girl go. But if you keep pushing, you'll end up like her mother, disappeared." Elias's blood boiled, but he kept his expression calm. "You think I'd believe a word you say?" "You'd be wise to," the man replied, his tone darkening. "Chemicor doesn't lose, Judge. We don't negotiate. This is your only chance to end this without collateral damage." Elias took a slow step forward, his gaze unyielding. "You're wrong about one thing." The man raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Elias's voice was like steel. "I don't care about collateral damage when it comes to exposing scum like you." Before the man could respond, a loud crack echoed through the lodge. Harper burst through the door, his weapon drawn. "Drop it," he barked. The man turned, but Harper was faster. A single shot rang out, and the intruder crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering out of reach. Harper lowered his gun, breathing heavily. Told you to wait for me. Elias allowed himself a brief smile. Glad you made it. From the closet, Amara peeked out, her eyes wide with relief. Elias rushed to her side, scooping her into his arms. It's okay, he murmured. You're safe now. But as he held her close, he knew the battle was far from over. The evidence they had was enough to implicate Chemicor, but to bring them down, they would need grace, and time was running out. The next step. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the three of them sat in the lodge, huddled around the table. Harper patched up a scrape on his arm, his expression grim. The facility in these files, Elias said, pointing to the map. That's where they're holding Grace. Harper nodded. Then that's where we're going. It's a fortress, Elias said. We'll need more than just the two of us. Harper smirked. Don't worry. I've got a few friends who owe me favors. Elias glanced at Amara, who was clutching Button tightly. He knelt beside her, his expression serious but kind. Amara, we're going to get your mommy back. But I need you to be brave one more time. Amara looked up at him, her small face filled with determination. I can do it, she said softly. For mommy. Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. The time for running was over. It was time to fight. And this time, they wouldn't stop until they brought Chemicor, and everyone behind it, to their knees. The heart of the labyrinth. The air in the safe house was heavy with anticipation as Elias, Harper, and Amara prepared for the next stage of their mission. A small team had been assembled overnight, individuals Harper trusted implicitly. These were not your average law enforcement officers. They were skilled operatives who had left official channels to fight corruption from the shadows. Among them were Nina, a tech wizard who could bypass almost any security system, and Dax, a former military strategist who excelled in tactical planning. The facility they were targeting was not just Chemicor's secret warehouse. According to the stolen data Byte had provided, it was their central operations hub for off-the-books experiments and storage of incriminating materials. Most importantly, it was the likeliest place where Grace was being held. The plan. The team gathered around the dining table in the safe house, now transformed into a command center. Dax spread out the facility's blueprints, pointing to various entry points and security measures. This is not your typical warehouse, Dax said, his deep voice commanding attention. It's fortified like a bunker. Motion detectors, armed guards, and cameras cover every angle. The good news. Nina can loop their security feeds, but it'll only buy us a 20-minute window. That's not much time, Elias said, his brow furrowed. It's all we'll need if we move fast, Dax replied. There are 3 objectives. 1. Extract Grace. 2. Secure the evidence on site. 3. Get out alive. Nina added, I'll be stationed nearby in the van, running interference. If anything changes, more guards, system reboots, I'll alert you. Harper leaned over the map. What about the guards? How heavily armed are we talking? Enough to make this a very bad idea if we're not careful, Dax said bluntly. But they won't expect us to hit them tonight. That's our edge. Elias glanced at Amara, who sat quietly in a corner, drawing pictures of her mother. The thought of leaving her behind weighed heavily on him, but he knew it was the only way to keep her safe. You'll stay here with Nina, Elias told her. She's the smartest person I know, and she'll make sure nothing happens to you. Amara hesitated, then nodded. Promise you'll bring Mommy back. Elias knelt beside her, his expression serious. I promise. The approach. The drive to the facility was tense, the silence broken only by the hum of the van's engine. Amara sat in the back with Nina, clutching Button tightly as she watched the adults prepare. Elias sat up front, going over the plan in his mind. Every detail had to be perfect. There was no room for error. The facility loomed in the distance, a stark concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fencing and floodlights. Harper, Dax, and Elias exited the van just outside the perimeter, while Nina set up her workstation. I'm in, Nina said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Looping security feeds now. You have 20 minutes." Dax led the way, cutting through the fence with precision. The team moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the damp grass. As they approached the side entrance, Harper disabled the lock with a small device Nina had provided. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet. Long corridors stretched out before them, the sterile white walls illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Dax checked his watch. Clocks ticking. Move fast. The evidence room. The first objective was the evidence room, a secure vault where Chemicor stored sensitive documents and physical samples. According to Byte's data, this room held not only records of their illegal activities, but also the names of those who had facilitated them, including high-ranking officials. Nina's voice crackled in their earpieces. "You're clear to enter the East Wing, but there's a patrol heading your way in 5 minutes." "Understood," Harper replied. "We'll be gone before they get here." They reached the vault, its steel door imposing but not impenetrable. Dax worked quickly, placing a compact explosive on the lock. "Step back," he ordered. The lock blew open with a muffled pop, and the door creaked as it swung inward. Inside, rows of filing cabinets and shelves lined the room. Elias and Harper began grabbing everything they could: hard drives, folders, and boxes of samples. "This is it," Elias murmured, holding up a file marked Trial 274. "Zinthera." "Bag it and move," Harper said, his tone urgent. The prisoner. With the evidence secured, the team moved toward their second objective: Grace. According to the facility's layout, she was likely being held in an isolated section at the far end of the building. As they approached, the faint hum of machinery grew louder, accompanied by muffled voices. "Guards ahead," Nina warned. 2 standing outside the door. "You're going to need to take them out quietly." Dax nodded, signaling for the others to stay back. With practiced efficiency, he crept forward, dispatching the guards with a pair of swift, silent strikes. Harper moved in to drag their unconscious bodies out of sight. Elias's heart pounded as he approached the door. He had imagined this moment countless times since Amara burst into his courtroom, but now that it was here, he felt a surge of uncertainty. What if they were too late? He pushed the door open, and there she was, Grace Jones. She was seated in a metal chair, her wrists bound and her face bruised but defiant. Her sharp eyes widened in disbelief as she saw Elias. "Elias," she whispered, her voice cracking. "How?" "No time for questions," Elias said, moving to untie her. "We're getting you out of here." As he helped her to her feet, Grace winced, clutching her side. "They've been moving me between locations. I didn't think anyone would find me." "We're here now," Elias said firmly. "Can you walk?" Grace nodded, her resolve shining through her pain. "Let's go." The escape. With Grace in tow, the team retraced their steps, but Nina's voice came through with an urgent warning. "You've got company." "A lot of it." They must have noticed the looped feeds. Harper cursed under his breath. "How many?" "Too many to count. You need to move. Now." They broke into a run, the sound of alarms blaring behind them. Guards poured into the corridors, shouting orders and firing shots. Dax led the way, his sharp instincts guiding them through the maze of hallways. "Take a left," Nina shouted. "There's an emergency exit ahead." The team barreled through the door, emerging into the cool night air. The van was parked just beyond the fence, its engine running. Nina waved them over, her face pale but determined. "Get in," she shouted. They piled into the van, slamming the doors shut as Nina floored the accelerator. Bullets pinged off the sides, but the van roared forward, tearing down the dirt road and disappearing into the darkness. A bittersweet reunion. Back at the safe house, Amara stood anxiously at the door, her small hands clutching button. When the van screeched to a halt, she ran out, her eyes searching desperately. "Monty," she cried as Grace stepped out, her face lighting up with relief. Amara. Grace dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. Tears streamed down both their faces as they clung to each other. Elias watched the reunion from a distance, his chest tight with emotion. This moment was why they had risked everything, why they had fought so hard. Grace looked up at him, her voice trembling. "You kept your promise." Elias nodded, his voice thick. "And I'm not done yet. We still have work to do." As the team regrouped inside, the weight of their victory was tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. They had Grace, and they had the evidence, but Chemicor wasn't finished. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, Elias felt hope. They had the truth, and now they would make sure the world heard it. The safe house hummed with subdued activity. Grace sat on the couch, her arms wrapped protectively around Amara, who refused to let go of her mother. The moment was fragile, a bubble of relief amidst the chaos, but everyone in the room knew it wouldn't last. Elias stood nearby, watching Grace with a mixture of relief and unease. She looked exhausted, her body battered and bruised, but her eyes still carried the sharp intensity he remembered. She caught his gaze and gave him a faint smile. "You look older," she said softly, her voice hoarse. Elias chuckled, the tension in his chest loosening slightly. "And you look just as stubborn." Grace's smile faded. "They'll come for us, you know. Chemicor won't let this go." "They already tried," Harper said, his tone grim as he entered the room. He had been on a call with Nina, who was monitoring Chemicor's movements from a secure location. "Nina's picking up chatter on their internal comms. They're scrambling, but it won't take long before they regroup." Grace nodded, her expression hardening. "Then we hit them first." Elias frowned. "Grace, you've just been through hell. You need to rest." "There's no time," she said firmly. "I've seen what they're capable of, Elias. They've killed people, innocent patients, whistleblowers. They won't stop unless we take them down." Piecing it all together, the table in the safe house became a battlefield of information. Grace spread out the evidence they had retrieved, adding it to the files Byte had extracted from Chemicor's servers. Together, the team worked to organize the documents into a clear narrative, proof of the company's crimes that no court could ignore. "This," Grace said, pointing to a series of emails, "is the heart of it. These executives knew Zinthera was causing fatal side effects, and they buried the data. They manipulated clinical trial results and bribed regulators to fast-track FDA approval. And these," Nina added, holding up photos of patient records, "show the real impact. Names, faces, and dates. This is the human cost of their greed." Elias studied the files, his jaw tightening. "This is enough to bury them." "Not yet," Harper interjected. "Chemicor has friends in high places. If we release this now, they'll spin it as a smear campaign. We need to control the narrative." Grace leaned forward. "There's one more piece. The warehouse wasn't the only facility they were using. They have a research lab outside the city. It's where they conducted the original Zinthera trials. If we can expose what's in there, it'll be impossible for them to cover it up." Elias nodded slowly. "Then that's where we go next." A dangerous gamble. The decision to infiltrate the research lab was not made lightly. The facility was heavily guarded, its location even more secure than the warehouse they had just escaped. But Grace insisted it was the key to taking Chemicor down. "This is where they started," she explained. "If we can prove they knew about the side effects from the beginning, it will destroy them." Harper, ever the pragmatist, outlined the risks. "This isn't just another raid. If we get caught, it's over. No second chances." "We won't get caught," Grace said with quiet determination. "Not if we plan this right." Dax began sketching out a new strategy, one that would rely on precision and timing. Nina, working from a remote location, would once again loop the facility's security feeds, but this time she would also plant false alerts to draw the guards away from their positions. "It'll give you 15 minutes to get in and out. Nina said over the comms. Any longer, and you'll be out of excuses for why half their cameras are offline. That's all we need, Grace said. Elias looked at her, his concern evident. You're sure you're ready for this? She met his gaze, her expression unwavering. I didn't come this far to stop now. The research lab. The lab was an imposing structure, its sleek, modern exterior a stark contrast to the surrounding forest. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, and guards patrolled in pairs, their movements precise and methodical. From their vantage point in the woods, Elias and the team could see everything. Security's tight, Dax observed, adjusting his binoculars, but Nina's diversion should pull most of them away. Let's hope it works, Harper muttered. Nina's voice crackled in their earpieces. Distraction in 3, 2, 1. Suddenly, alarms blared from the far side of the facility. Guards scrambled toward the disturbance, leaving their posts in a well-rehearsed response. The team moved swiftly, scaling the fence and slipping through a side entrance. Inside, the lab was eerily quiet. The sterile white hallways stretched out before them, the hum of machinery the only sound. Split up, Dax instructed. We cover more ground this way. Grace, you and Elias head for the central database. Harper and I will secure the labs. Grace nodded, leading Elias down the corridor. As they moved, she whispered, This place, it's worse than I imagined. What do you mean? Elias asked. They didn't just test on volunteers, Grace said, her voice heavy with emotion. They brought in vulnerable people, homeless, undocumented workers, people no one would miss. They experimented on them like lab rats. Elias's stomach churned, but he pushed the anger aside. We'll make sure the world knows. The truth revealed. In the central database room, Grace and Elias found rows of servers humming softly. Grace quickly got to work, inserting a USB drive Nina had provided. This will copy everything, Grace said. Emails, trial results, payment records. It's all here. As the data transfer progressed, Elias stood guard, his ears straining for any sound of approaching footsteps. His nerves were frayed, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the transfer completed. Grace ejected the drive, slipping it into her pocket. Let's go. They regrouped with Harper and Dax in the lab, where the horrors of Chemicor's experiments were laid bare. Medical equipment stained with blood, discarded vials of untested drugs, and walls lined with patient charts told a grim story. We have enough, Harper said, his voice tight with emotion. Let's get out of here. But as they made their way back toward the exit, the sound of approaching boots froze them in their tracks. Guards, Dax hissed. They're onto us. The standoff. The team ducked into a side room, their breaths shallow as the guards passed by. But as they moved to escape, they were spotted. Stop, a voice shouted, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Harper didn't hesitate. He fired first, taking down one of the guards before chaos erupted. The team returned fire, using the cover of the narrow hallway to their advantage. Move, Dax shouted. I'll hold them off. No, Elias said. We all go together. But Dax shook his head, a grim smile on his face. You have Grace and the evidence. That's what matters. Before anyone could argue, Dax charged into the fray, his weapon blazing. Harper grabbed Elias and Grace, pulling them toward the exit. Come on, he said. He's buying us time. They burst into the night, running for the fence as alarms blared. Nina's van was waiting, its doors open. Get in, she shouted. They piled in, the van speeding away just as more guards spilled out of the facility. The cost of truth. Back at the safe house, the mood was somber. They had escaped with the evidence, but Dax's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone. We have everything we need, Grace said, holding up the USB drive. Now we make them pay. Elias nodded, his jaw set. We'll take this to the press, the courts, anyone who will listen. Chemicor's finished. But as he looked at Grace and Amara, who had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, Elias knew the fight wasn't over. They had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. And this time, they wouldn't stop until justice was served. The final stand. The safe house buzzed with quiet tension as the team regrouped in the early morning light. The USB drive sat in the center of the table like a beacon of hope, containing the irrefutable evidence that could destroy Chemicor. Grace's tired eyes lingered on it, knowing the immense cost it had taken to retrieve it. Dax's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone, his absence a stark reminder of the stakes they were playing for. Amara sat on the couch with Button, her small fingers tracing the bear's worn fur. She watched the adults with wide eyes, sensing the gravity of the moment but not fully understanding it. Her mother sat beside her, holding her close as if afraid to let go. Elias stood by the window, his arms crossed tightly. His mind churned with plans, possibilities, and risks. They had the evidence, but now came the most dangerous part, making sure the world saw it. A risky alliance. Harper entered the room, his face grim. I just got off the phone with my contacts. Chemicor's lawyers are already working to discredit Grace. They're planting fake stories, doctoring files, and pulling every string they can. Grace clenched her fists. That's what they do. They'll smear me, bury the truth, and move on like nothing happened. Not if we move faster, Elias said, his voice steady but resolute. We take this public, immediately. The press, the courts, social media. If we hit them from every angle, they won't be able to contain it. That's a good way to get us all killed, Harper said bluntly. Chemicor is not going down without a fight. And if they can't silence us legally, they'll come after us another way. Then we make sure they can't ignore us. Grace countered. I know a journalist I can trust. Someone who won't back down, no matter what pressure they face. Harper hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but we need to coordinate this carefully. If Chemicor gets wind of where we are, they'll send everything they've got. Nina, who had been silent until now, looked up from her laptop. Then we'll make them think we're somewhere else. The decoy. Nina's plan was simple but risky. Using the data they had retrieved, she would plant fake leads about the evidence's location, drawing Chemicor's attention away from the safe house. Meanwhile, Grace would meet with her journalist contact at a secure location to deliver the story. It's not foolproof, Nina warned. They'll figure it out eventually, but it should buy us enough time to get the truth out. Elias studied the plan, his mind racing. What about Amara? He asked. She can't stay here while this is happening. Grace's expression hardened. She's staying with me. No, Elias said firmly. It's too dangerous. If Chemicor realizes you're the one leaking the story, they'll come for you. And her. Grace started to protest, but Amara's small voice cut through the tension. I'll stay with Judge Elias. The room fell silent. Grace looked at her daughter, her expression conflicted. Amara. It's okay, Mommy, Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I'll be brave, just like you. Grace pulled her into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. You're the bravest girl I know, she whispered. And I'll come back for you. I promise. The drop. The meeting with Grace's journalist contact, Alex Morales, was arranged in a public park just outside the city, a place where Chemicor's agents would be less likely to make a move. Grace wore a nondescript hoodie and jeans, her face partially hidden by sunglasses and a baseball cap. Alex was already waiting when she arrived, seated on a bench with a cup of coffee. He looked up as she approached, his expression wary but determined. Grace, he said quietly, I didn't think I'd see you again. I didn't think I'd make it this far, she admitted, handing him the USB drive. This is everything. The trials, the payoffs, the deaths. It's all there. Alex plugged the drive into his laptop, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the files. This is enough to blow them sky high. That's the idea, Grace said, But we don't have much time. They know we have this, and they won't stop until they bury it. And us." Alex nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll get this out. Every outlet I know, every journalist I trust. But you need to stay safe. Once this hits, they'll come after you with everything they've got." "I'm counting on it," Grace said, her voice steely. "Just make sure the truth gets out." The siege. Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was tense. Nana's decoy plan had worked for now. Chemicor's agents were chasing false leads across the city, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they closed in. Elias paced the room, his nerves on edge. Amara watched him from the couch, her small hands clutching Button tightly. "You're scared," she said softly. Elias stopped, looking at her. "A little," he admitted, "but being scared doesn't mean we stop fighting." Amara nodded, her eyes serious. "That's what Mommy says." Before Elias could respond, Harper burst into the room, his phone in hand. "They're onto us," he said. "Chemicor's people just took out one of Nina's decoys. They'll be here soon." Elias's heart sank. "How long do we have?" "Not long enough," Harper said grimly. "We need to move." The final stand. The safe house became a flurry of activity as the team prepared to evacuate. Nina worked furiously to wipe their digital trail, while Harper loaded weapons and supplies into their vehicles. But before they could leave, the sound of approaching engines shattered the quiet. "They're here," Harper said, his voice grim. "Get Amara out of here. Now." Elias grabbed Amara, his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. "We're going, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady, despite the fear coursing through him. "But what about Mommy?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. "She'll meet us soon," Elias promised. "Right now, we need to keep you safe." As Harper and Nina held off the attackers, Elias slipped out the back with Amara, weaving through the dense forest that surrounded the safe house. The sound of gunfire echoed behind them, but Elias didn't look back. The truth prevails. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, Elias's phone buzzed with an alert. The story had gone live. News outlets across the country were reporting on Chemicor's crimes, their headlines filled with the damning evidence Grace and the team had uncovered. Chemicor's executives were being arrested. Regulators were launching investigations. The company's stock plummeted as the world learned the truth. Elias held Amara close as they watched the news unfold, tears streaming down his face. Grace's bravery had sparked a fire that couldn't be extinguished. A new beginning. Days later, Grace reunited with Amara at a safe location. Their embrace was fierce and unbreakable, a testament to the strength they had both shown. Elias stood nearby, watching with a mix of relief and pride. The fight wasn't over. There would be court battles, hearings, and more. But for the first time, it felt like justice was within reach. "You did it," Elias said as Grace approached him, her daughter in tow. "We did it," she corrected, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Elias, for everything." He nodded, his heart full. It was the right thing to do. As they walked away together, Elias knew one thing for certain. The battle for truth and justice was far from over, but they had already won the most important fight of all. They had proven that even in the face of unimaginable power, courage and determination could prevail.